Hi lovelies, today I wanted to do a video response to the lovely Natalia over at Ouroboros, who's got some fantastic tags at the minute. But the tag I wanted to respond to today was the blastedego in a tower tag, which responds to the meaning of the tower card in tarot and how you respond to it. Now, Natalia made some fantastic points about it's not necessarily just a shock event or, you know, chaos coming in or something destructive. It's actually a rebuilding of the self, and it's a destruction of the masks and the false self that we build for ourselves. I loved that interpretation. She also talked about the crown on the tower, which we often see as being, you know, we're king of our own castle and we're in charge of everything, and this is like a false idea that we build about ourselves. And I agree totally with that, but I'd never thought of the crown in that way, so I loved that take. So I'll start by saying that I absolutely agree that the tower card is about the destruction of the ego, or a story we've told ourselves, or a false self. I also think that it's very much to do with the traditional take that it's a shock event, a disaster, something that can't be rebuilt or moulded back together. And I think that aspect of the tarot can be seen in most of the tarot cards you pick up. And I think the event coming in that causes the destruction is represented in the lightning. So you see some element of lightning strike in all of the tarot cards, and not in that one, but in that one you see the fire, which is the other element. I think it's not so much the shock event, or if you get this card in reading you think, oh, there's going to be a sudden disaster. I think it's the fire is important too for me. The fire hints at literally everything is destroyed. Fire is the one thing going through something that will obliterate everything. And I think when we see tarot cards with all the bricks coming down eventually, then it's brick by brick. Literally, it's a dismantling of everything. It's oblivion. So I think, yes, the external event coming in, the health diagnosis, the divorce, a sudden death, a job loss that causes devastation, that's important too in this card with the lightning. But I think the oblivion of it, the fire then sweeping in, which speaks to like literally everything is gone, then begins to speak of how devastating this event is. And that's where the false self and the rebuilding of the self comes into play. Literally the fire sweeps away everything. So oblivion, it destroys the external as well. It destroys the maps you had for yourself. It destroys the hopes and dreams for your future. It changes the whole landscape. Oblivion isn't a 10 of Swords moment. It isn't just an ending or betrayal that you recover from and you pick yourself up the same. The Tower for me is something that when you pick yourself back up, nothing is the same. You actually have to clear away the rubble and create a new path, and you have a new landscape to deal with. You have new maps you need to build. The Tower has the ability to cross over time frames. I think the Death card and the 10 of Swords card very much stays in present and future. It's a present event that is an ending that can affect the future to come. I think the Tower card can go backwards. It can make you readdress the past as well. that total destruction of ego. I think it is the only card, I say without having thought about that, but it is definitely a card that can travel, affect the future, it affects the immediate, and it can change the past for you as well. And you only get that with a complete destruction and oblivion of everything you knew before. So whereas the Death and Ten of Swords, I think, for me personally, how I read them, stay in present and future affecting, the Tower affects the whole lot. But with that complete oblivion and the need for map building and totally everything being changed, the Tower card also comes with a promise of complete renewal as well. And I think we often miss the promise within the Tower card. Yes, the Tower card moments are going to hurt like crazy, and there is no way around that. But within that hurt, there is the possibility of complete renewal, complete transformation, and eventually complete healing. It's a dramatic card because the extremes are immense, but it is a card that holds so much power. For me, this is the journey to the underworld. This is the journey down to meet the dark goddess that you didn't have time to prepare for. You had no warnings you were paying attention to it anyway. And it's the sudden fall, it's the drop. So it doesn't surprise me that we see figures falling. The issue of the falling and the falling bricks and the falling figures, for me, it's a journey down, a sudden journey down to somewhere really, really, really dark. So it's an underworld journey, but it's the one that you fall through all the 7 gates with no warning, and you go from the world that you knew to the underworld in an instant. And it's a painful fall. All falls are painful, but again you have that promise of renewal. All the mythology around journeys down to the dark goddess and the underworld journeys in mythology, the women come up transformed. And I'm sure, like most of us, have at some point experienced a Tower moment where the floor opened up into a crevasse and we were suddenly hurtling down through the gates to the underworld to be lying at a Rishkaga's feet with no warning. And when you've experienced that sort of event and come through it and ascended again, then I think we can all speak of the power of transformation that's to be had within that sort of Tower journey. And it's a journey that we don't do once, unfortunately. Of course, the Fool's journey is a cyclical journey, and I think letting go of control, once you accept that about the Tower card, makes the descent down and underworld visiting a lot easier to contend with. And I think the idea of the seed, like a seed, is good as well. The idea that with a being thrown down, it's with such force that you actually go underground. It links back into that idea of the underworld journey. But then also, it's a complete death. It's not death to an event, a single aspect of yourself. It's death to everything, which I think is why Ten of Swords, the figure's often lying on the top of the ground, whereas in the Tower card, the ground is being churned up too, and figures are being hurled. You just know they're not going to end up sitting on the ground. They're going to be hurled under the ground and into the ground. And I love this Tower card from the Muse Tarot because it shows like somebody dropping down into the abyss. But I love the power in this figure. I don't see her as the egoic self or the false self. I see her as the new self waiting to be reborn. There's real power in it. It's a hint that yeah, look, you're sinking down, but there's a power in that figure, which to me hints of the power to come if you can mine it for the gifts. And I don't see that so much in the Ten of Swords card. I see the Ten of Swords card as complete endings, devastation, betrayals, and you're lying on top of the ground waiting to pull the swords out and heal and begin again. But it doesn't come with the oblivion of everything that went before and and everything that you dreamed would be to come. This is the card that speaks of oblivion to me, where you have to start again from scratch. And yes, starting again from scratch does involve letting go of all the stories you told about yourself, all of the personas you'd built up, all of the false narratives, all of your own false narratives, but also all of the false narratives that other people have put on you. I think the Tower moments are brilliant for, like I say, flying into the past as well and shining spotlights on other people's voices in you that you've used to build up this false sense of who you are. For me, the Tower moments I've experienced have ended up being the most healing aspects because of that, because of the spotlight they can shine on the past. They're tragically hard to get through, but the rewards are immense. And I love the Tower card in the Tarot of the She, that kind of rebirth, more than with the Death card. It's like a complete rebirth of everything into almost a sort of godlike status. Smacks to me of not only the mythology of like Greek mythology, where underworld journeys were taken. It really does speak of the gains, and I love what the guidebook says about it. It says, I am the burning lightning truth of your innermost divine soul. Strip away, blow away the empty masks of forgetfulness and know your sacred truth. From my eyes, illusion is burned away. From my voice are ripped all lies. From my heart is torn all distrust, freeing the wings of my ascension. So it really does talk about stripping away everything that that was false, the complete oblivion into a spectacular rebirth. And I think for that it does need to span past, present and future, which I think the Tower card does. It says, I stand in the cosmos as one born into a new life. The comforting bandages of the old are scorched to oblivion. There's that word. I know the pain of loss, and through that pain I find my greatest gift. I find my soul, my truth, my strongest foundation. The spark becomes a blazing fire as the ego weeps at its demise. Follow me beyond the sorrow and find the startling vision of your own eternity. So I think this card for me completely sums up the power within the tragic oblivion of the Tower. But you have to go through, you have to descend, you have to spend time in the underworld, and you have to ascend and integrate the lessons of the Tower too. It's mining for gold, but it's a mining that you're forced to do because there is nothing left. Now for me, the biggest Tower moment for me that comes to mind, my personal Tower moment, the lightning coming in, the strike, was the understanding that the life I was in and the partnership I was in was a complete sham. And I kind of discovered truth completely by accident, although the Dark Goddess had been beckoning me to look. But I had a part of my false self was naivety. I refused to look, and codependency. I wanted to keep everybody happy, and I refused to see the trauma that I was stuck in, even though it was hospitalising me and putting me on MRI machines with fits and seizures. All the signs were there that actually I was stuck in trauma, but I was refusing to see it. And basically my false self, my ego, and my stories about the life I was living had me blindfolded. And some of my tarot moments were literally a dropping of the blindfold in an instant, and an awakening to the path I was actually walking rather than the imagined path that I was telling myself I was on. This culminated in divorce and family no contact. It resulted in 95% of my friends also being gone, and being left with the most magical circle of people. It was like the film The Truman Show. Is it The Truman Show, where he wakes up and realises his whole life is a film set? I'm not a great film watcher, but I think it's called that. And it was like that for me. I woke up one day and it hit me like a train coming in. Facts started rolling in, and I realised that everybody I loved, everybody who I thought had my back, close family members, best friends, were all part of the sham. And it was a plummet down to the underworld in 2 seconds flat, with no time to prepare. And I stayed there for a long time. I was incapable of movement for a long time. But I think for me, the time when I embraced the full oblivion of the moment came the first time my now ex-husband came to collect my 3 children, to take them for his first weekend away from me. I remember closing the door on the 3 kids going, and the realisation that not only had I lived through this tarot moment, but now my role as mother was being taken away as well. That's what it felt like. I realised that half of Christmases would be gone, half of every holiday would be gone, half of all of their precious weekends as children was being taken away from me. And it felt like a punishment that I didn't deserve. And for me, I think that was the final gate into the underworld, where I was being asked to shed that egoic sense of being the mom I'd told myself I was. Because suddenly I was a mom with children in 2 places, and I'd effectively lost half of these amazing events to spend time with my children while they're little. And I think for me that was the final slip through. It was a you need to give this up now, and it was the final thing I was holding on to, because my identity as that mother was core to who I am. And it was shocking, and I shut the front door and slid down the wall and ended up sitting on the floor, and I didn't stand up again for an entire night. I just stayed there, literally completely broken. As broken as any of the goddesses or the people in Greek myths I read about who undergo the same journey, completely bereft of everything that I'd ever thought about myself and my life. The past history was gone. It didn't mean anything anymore. It was the spotlight of that tarot moment proved to me that it was all false narrative. My relationships were gone. There was a false narrative threading through all of those. And my present was completely altered. There was nothing recognisable to hang on to. And my future plans and hopes were also gone. When I eventually stood up from that final drop down to the underworld and the final acceptance of the tarot card and my tarot moment, I stood up changed. I stood up a different person, so much so that I never used my birth name ever again. nothing worked anymore. False narratives had moulded me. I couldn't take on the cloak of who I was, and eventually I changed my name, but I never used my birth name again. And it was a doorway into meeting goddesses and deity, which at the time I didn't understand. Very early on in this tarot moment, where I was refusing to respond to my birth name, I searched the internet for anything to do with recovering from being broken open, and I actually put that search in, broken open, and I found this book, which was amazing, which is about the power that you can find in being completely broken apart. But in searching for that book as well, I also came upon my very first goddess I'd ever encountered knowingly to me, and that's the Hindu goddess Akhilandeshvari. Now, Akhilandeshvari is also called the goddess of never not broken, and she is in a perpetual state of being totally broken, and it's a state that she chooses because in that moment where everything is destroyed and everything is broken open, it's only in that moment that you have the most dynamic opportunity to choose who you are going to be, to rebirth yourself, to rebuild whatever path you want. When everything is gone, with the oblivion that comes with the tower, then there is so much power in that moment, and that is why this goddess chose to never not be broken. She wanted to stay in that power, and there are images of her riding down the river on a crocodile, because it was one of the most feared animals, and she was embracing it and dragging the power from it. And as a goddess, her story and the myths around her, I held on to them in the darkest of times and used her story to find the strength to take the next step forward. So it was my very first step into the world of the divine feminine, having had a very spiritually bereft journey up until that point. It was my first step, knowing step, into the journey with these goddesses. And I say knowing step because for years I'd had experiences with crows and ravens in my childhood and adolescence, in a very controlling environment that shaped me with the false narratives in the first place. There were moments, extraordinary moments, with crows and ravens, one coming down and being on my arm, and staring me in the face, like literally like here, like a wild one. And it always happened at moments of extreme trauma, of extreme stress, and in moments of abuse. And for me, I'd knowingly had this connection and had these experiences, but being in a spiritually bereft household that was actively atheist, I'd never really considered what any of it meant. So when I stood up for my tarot moment and announced to the world that nobody was to call me my name anymore, I went on a search for my new name. And as part of that search, I wanted to bring some joy back in, and I'm very pink and I'm very sequiny and I'm very fairy lighty, and part of that, I didn't want that to die, and I could feel it was dying. So I chose the name Candy as my first name because I just loved it. And for me, it spoke of a feminine, light, joyous energy. But I just couldn't think of a new surname, and I didn't want to stay with my married surname. I certainly wasn't going to take on my family, my maiden name again. because a lot of the abuse was linked in with that as well, and a lot of the betrayals of the Tower moment. So I knew that I needed the whole name to be changed. And it was somebody that suggested to me, a friend, oh, why don't you use the name Morrigan? And I thought it was a lovely name, and but I didn't know anything about it. And I said, oh, well, where have you got that name from? And she then told me, oh, it's a Celtic goddess. It's the goddess Morrigan. And she's like quite dark. And I'd asked for people to come up with ideas to balance out the pink of the candy, because I'm quite polar. I'm a deep thinker and can be quite dark sometimes, but I've also got the pink side. So I'd got the candy, and I wanted a name to balance out the light that candy was. And my friend told me about this goddess. And at the time, the word goddess didn't mean anything to me. The word goddess meant fictional story from the past. It didn't have any spiritual connotations. It didn't have any sacredness to me. And I just researched the goddess Morrigan and read all of her stories, and the fact that she was the queen of the battlefield. And I thought, because of the history I'd walked, if anybody could use the name of somebody that had been involved in battles and overcome them, it was me. So I decided it balanced it out perfectly. So that's where my name Candy Morrigan comes from. And it felt like a rebirth. It felt like in the new name, because I knew that I was starting again and there was an oblivion in that Tower moment, that it felt apt to choose a new name, to almost give birth to myself, because that's the process I was going through. I was meeting myself for the first time. False narratives are falling away. The egoic self that I'd built up had fallen away as well. And the new name represented a lot. So through my Tower moment, I had my first experiences with Goddess and the Divine Feminine. Later on, as I stepped into a new spiritual path and witchcraft and started looking more into working with deity, I have to say there was a moment where I was horror-filled that I'd taken on the Morrigan's name. I was still working with the Morrigan, and she came to me all the way through a very traumatic 5-year divorce, and at moments where I felt I couldn't go on, there would be crows. I got to the point where if I felt like I couldn't take another step forward, I looked around me for the crow, and there was always one there, and it would give me the power to take the next step. You can see the crow. Can you see it? The crow at the top of this tower makes me smile. This raincoast tarot makes me, speaks to me a lot. So when I realised that there was more to goddesses than just a story, and that I'd actually stepped on sacred ground, I felt the weight of the arrogance of me taking on that name, which my divorce lawyer, as we walked out of divorce court celebrating 5 years later, she took me across the road to her offices and had drawn up official paperwork as a gift to actually change my name officially, although I'd been using the name for 5 years. And she did it as a gift to me for coming through what she called the most horrific divorce of her that she'd ever seen in her entire career. But when I realised I had stepped onto sacred ground, I panicked, and I was still working with the Morrigan then. I began working knowingly with the Morrigan then, and I did a lot of work around the guilt I felt of taking on that name, and trying to find out whether it should be changed to something different, because I didn't want to disrespect an immense power that had supported me through the blackest of times. And the one day I felt very strongly in in a meditation that there would be a sign given me, and that if a sign was given to me that day, that it was fine and to chill about it. So I came out of the meditation thinking, gosh, I hope I do get a sign, because I'm very attached to my name now and I don't want to change it again. And it was about 5 minutes before I was due to drive to school to pick up my little boy, and I got in the car on the school run, picked him up, and on the way down to the school run there were black feathers everywhere that I started picking up, thinking, oh wow. And then as we walked back to the car and turned the corner on the car park, my little boy was running in front of me, and he turned around and yelled, wow, Mum, there's a massive crow by our car staring at us, come and see. And sure enough, there was a huge crow sat on the gatepost next to my car, just staring at us as we walked to it. So at that point I started relaxing about the fact that I'd overstepped the mark by changing my name to Morrigan. But it seems funny that that the descent down that the tower threw me into made me realise that I'd been working with deity right from a little girl, because all of a sudden when I realised the sacredness within the stories of the Morrigan and the links to crows, all those visitations from my childhood, which always happened in times of trauma, they all made sense to me. And so that was my tower moment. And yes, it did give me the power to rebuild, but I think it took 5 years to start the ascent up. And at the point that I felt like I could leave the darkness of the Morrigan, she came to me in another meditation and brought with her Bridget, who is a much lighter, she's the I didn't even know about any other goddesses either, so it wasn't that I knew about Bridget and the Morrigan brought her in because I knew about her. There's so much to learn in witchcraft. I hadn't even touched on any of the goddess stories. I hadn't even read a book at that point about Morrigan. This is all personal experience and real experience knowledge that I'm talking about. But in a meditation, the Morrigan stepped forward, and she'd brought somebody else with her who had a beautiful cloak on. And the Morrigan kind of pushed her forward and backed away, and I immediately knew the Morrigan was going. And I think this is the turning point where I'd done enough work and I'd rebuilt myself enough to start the ascent back up. And Bridget is part of that ascent now. I now work with Bridget. And I think the Morrigan was just saying, you're out of trauma now, you can start to live again. So that was a 5-year journey, so this isn't like a few days. And in the vision, this woman, who I didn't know at the time was Bridget, stepped forward, and around her appeared all of the cast of gaslighters and people who'd joined in on the betrayal, family members who'd been heavily involved, best friends who'd betrayed me, you know, all of the people that had been part of the tower moment appeared around her, and she just stared at me and smiled, and her cloak began to grow, and all of these figures just dropped, it seemed, off the edge of the world and were gone. And she just looked at me as if to say, right, what now? And for me, that vision in a meditation was a turning point. Now, when I came out of the meditation, I immediately ran to Google and actually put into Google, is there a goddess with an expanding cloak? Because that's what I had seen in my vision, and it seemed to me the most bizarre thing to Google, and I thought it was going to come up with nothing. And up came Bridget and her expanding cloak and all the stories around that. So that was another spectacular moment. And when I realised she was the goddess that ushers in spring and new life, it was just a moment. So a 5-year journey in the underworld, and the rule of the underworld is anybody that visits it can't return. And I think that's true. I don't think you come out the same person. You have to rebuild a new person, and that's what I did, including my name, including my spiritual path, including all of the heartbreak and trauma of going no contact with people that you were your everything before. It's a divorcing of the whole world I know to start again. And I think at the point that I'd rebuilt something new, the Morrigan let me go and said, you're ready. So I didn't break the rule that you can't leave the underworld. I didn't leave. I left the me I was down there, the egoic false self of something that I'd built that wasn't real. And I left new, so it was a new person being allowed back out, and Bridget held my hand as I came out. So for me, the Tower card, it signifies oblivion, death of the false self, death of the false narratives other people have tried to put on you. It's the death of the ego blinding you. It's the ability to grab clear sight. It's the ability to change everything for yourself. There's a freedom in it, and it's brought about through devastation and fire and everything being taken away. It is the descent to the underworld. It is the meeting of the dark goddess, and it is the cloaking yourself in the power of that journey, and all of that in one card. The Tower card is incredible. So thank you guys for that. Thank you for listening to me ramble. I tried to make it short, but I am so moved by this tag and all the thought process and the personal history that I have in this, tied up in this card, that I wanted to try and put my thoughts into some sort of coherent video, which I hope it was. So yeah, the Tower card. Thank you, Natalia, for this wonderful tag. I will put all of Natalia's links down below, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye guys.